Hi, and welcome to the Trusted Executive Podcast. I'm here with Dr. John Blakey, the founder of the Trusted Executive Foundation, which helps CEOs and leaders across all sectors around the globe create a new standard of leadership defined by trustworthiness. John's work has been featured in Forbes, BBC News, Huff and the Sunday Times. So welcome, John.
Good afternoon, David. Delighted to be here again with you and the viewers and listeners.
Yes, we're at number 7. I can hardly believe it's 7 out of 9. Now, whether you're new or whether it's your second, third time or wherever, you'll probably know the idea of this podcast is to help you as a listener gain a practical understanding of the potential benefits of the trusted executive model to you, taking you through a deep dive with each of the 9 leadership habits which underpin this model. Now, as you say in the book, John, you didn't just dream up these 9 habits over a glass of red wine. They're a product of 6 years of evidence-based research at Aston Business School for your doctorate, involving over 500 board-level leaders. And with deep passion, you offer the business world an academically rigorous and relevant answer to the question, how do I do trust and why does it matter? So, John, from your research as an introduction for those listening, why should they care about trust? And in a nutshell, what did you discover in your research?
Yeah, why should you care about trust? Trust is the one thing that changes everything, as Covey said. And there are many, many academic research papers that will document the benefits of trust on anything from innovation and creativity to bottom line profitability to employee engagement to customer loyalty. It really is a magic wand, and therefore a magic wand that is increasingly, I think, critical to having the license to lead in the 21st century, that you lead with this currency of trust rather than the currency of power. In the research really highlighted that building high trust cultures does start at the top, that the biggest single factor in building a high trust culture is the behavior of the CEO and the senior leadership team. So the more senior you are in an organization, the more your behavior matters in terms of that role modeling and leading by example. The other thing that the research highlighted was that CEOs on average regard themselves as 29% more trustworthy than do the people that they lead. So we're probably not as good at this as we think we are. And I think that highlights the importance that, for us to really get to grips with this word and really understand what makes for trustworthy leadership. Because if we can measure it, if we can pin it down, then we can master it. And I think that's going to be a challenge facing all modern leaders in the coming months and years.
Thank you, John. Yes, and I do sense, having gone through already 6 of the 9 habits, that each of one we've looked at has really had a deep essence to it. And I think today we're going to habit number 7, which is actually really interesting. It's choosing to evangelize. But before we dive into that habit, as those listening may know, the 9 habits fall under 3 pillars. So we've looked at the pillar of ability and the pillar of integrity. And today we're going to a really interesting one, and this is the pillar of benevolence, one which is perhaps not very often discussed. And I know in your book you talk about it's time to rehumanize the workplace with benevolence. So could you give us an introduction to the 3rd pillar? Because I have a sense it's really important.
Yeah, I often talk about benevolence, the 3rd pillar, as the new kid on the block. Because I think, most of us who've been in leadership for any length of time, we know about the pillar of ability. We know it's expected of us to be competent at what we do. And we know about integrity. We know about ethics and values. We might not always step up to the plate, as much as we would like on those pillars, but we know about them as concepts and aspirations. But I think the pillar of benevolence is different, because when I was pursuing my leadership career in the 80s and 90s with companies like British Gas and Cadbury Schweppes, we didn't do benevolence. It was really an optional extra that you brought to your work because you were a human being, but you didn't typically need it in that industrial model, that profit-driven model. But I think in the modern age, in the social age, all of our stakeholders now are expecting that benevolence. And what that benevolence is common human care, compassion, kindness. It basically means that we want to know that you care, and we want to feel that you care in order for us to trust you and to trust your brand. And I think this benevolence is the new kid on the block. I say I never went on the Introduction to Benevolence for Senior Leaders course, but I fully expect in the coming years, we are going to be invited to go on those courses, and we are going to need to master benevolence in the same way as we've mastered ability and integrity.
Absolutely. And I think for me, we've spoken before, I think on the podcast, how we probably both grew up through our, in our leadership sense, in very much perhaps a male patriarchal system. And I really see perhaps this side is more calling on the feminine aspects. And by that, I don't just mean women. I actually believe that everyone has both masculine and feminine characteristics. And what one of my mentors said to me, David, was actually this means with masculine and feminine, that everyone has the ability to be both strong and caring. And so this aspect of benevolence, I think you mentioned it in the book, that you link part of it into emotional intelligence, which obviously we're seeing coming into the workplace. And as you said, how it's concern for the well-being of others. And we know, or I know, I own it for me, sometimes it was, can I get to the top of the pile? And it doesn't really matter. So this has as you said, a very, it's time to not just rehumanize the workplace, but really embody that and live that. And I think people can tell, can't they, John, if you're being sincere around this pillar of benevolence. It's not something I don't think you can play. Perhaps in the past we had charismatic leaders who feigned some sort of benevolence, but I think people get it as to whether you're being genuine or not around this.
Yeah, and part of that is the transparency that is afforded these days by social media and technology. So if you're trying to fake benevolence, if you're trying to put that veneer of benevolence on top of an otherwise untrustworthy approach, it's much easier for that to be exposed. And I think people are quite ruthless with exposing that these days because they're tired of the faking of it. They want the solid oak of benevolence, not the thin veneer that is easily scratched, and a millimeter thick. They want to know that this is rooted and solid. And I hope that these 3 habits that we're going to talk about under this pillar will give people again a practical map for how to build that benevolence so that it's equally as strong as the integrity and the ability pillars.
Right, it's wonderful. Now let's kick off then on this habit number 7, which is choosing to evangelize. I'm sure the listeners like me are really curious about this one because evangelize can be quite a trigger word for a lot of people. They might think, excuse my vernacular, you're going to push something down people's throat, tell them what to do, you're going to evangelize them. Sometimes it's not had a good press. Now, obviously, as we say, each habit has choosing, so it's choosing to evangelize. So again, let's get to the bottom of this. What does this habit, choosing to evangelize, really mean, John? And what benefits does it provide for an organization and its leadership team and members of staff?
Yeah, you're right that this word evangelize can be a trigger word. It's a provocative word. But for me, it was the right word to describe this habit that emerged from the research, because the root of the word evangelize actually comes from a Greek word, euangelion, which is spread the good news. Euangelion, it often evangelize is thought of now as a religious word, because a lot of the great evangelists were leading religious faiths. But it's actually, at its heart, it's about spreading the good news, whatever that good news is about, whatever the mission is, whatever the vision, whatever the inspiration. And one of the quotes that I use around this habit is that Guy Kawasaki wrote his article for Harvard Business Review, The Art of Evangelism. And in that, he said, evangelism, in the social age, evangelism is everyone's job. And I think what he means is that in this world of social media and 24-hour news cycles, if we don't get on the front foot and spread the good news about business and about our business and about our services and contribution, then we will drown in the sea of cynicism and negativity that is being spun around us. And I think in the past, we were able to take a more passive view on this habit. But interestingly, in the research for senior leaders, for CEOs and top leadership teams, this habit actually came out as the number 2 habit of all 9 habits. Number 1 habit was about honesty, which you might expect, but I was surprised that the habit of evangelizing came out as the 2nd most important habit of the 9 when it comes to inspiring trust as a CEO or a senior leader. So I think this is telling us that we can't expect other people to do that, spreading the good news for us. We have to embody it as leaders. We have to role model it. And of course, many of the the current gurus, think of Simon Sinek, start with why. Well, start with why is effectively all about evangelizing. It's, know your purpose, know your mission, reach into people's hearts before you reach into their heads. And evangelizing is all about reaching into people's hearts before you reach into their heads. And in that way, you create that commitment that drives, productivity, engagement, people going the extra mile. So I think committed believers that believe in your mission and your purpose are worth much, much more than conscripted sort of transactional employees that are just ticking a box. This is where we get that extra engagement and productivity through this habit of evangelizing.
Yes, and that wonderful. I do agree about the Simon Sinek when he looked at really the key aspect is why are we doing this and linking it into purpose. And you probably know I'm connected with Blueprint for Better Business here in the UK, which specifically looks at that with big organizations, getting behind their why, their purpose, how they're embodying it, how are they living it. But I'm hearing at this point, I've got often say, no, I can hear the audience saying, ask him this. And it's really this, because I think leaders can be charismatic, they can be passionate about something. But in my language, it can be delivered without the authenticity. It's delivered with spin. So actually, and we've seen this in the political, whatever your political party is, we've seen this in the political scene where people are passionate, they really have a strong why, but then it comes to light that actually it was spin, it wasn't authentic. So how do you, and it was manipulative, some people would say. So how does that apply to business? How can you support, how can a leader actually do this with passion and integrity as opposed to passion and spin or manipulation?
Yes, no, it's a great point, David, because the opposite habit, I often talk about the habits of power and the habits of trust, and that every habit of trust has an equal and opposite habit of power. So if you take the habit of honesty, then it's very easy to think, oh yeah, the opposite of honesty is dishonesty. And that's the habit of power. The opposite habit of evangelizing is that word manipulation that you used. The habit of power is to manipulate. The habit of trust to evangelize. Now, what is the difference? I think, again, you used the word about integrity. This is why we have to look at these 9 habits holistically. If the only habit I focus on is evangelize, and I don't pay attention to the habits of integrity, be honest, be open, be humble, then that evangelizing is going to tip over into manipulation over a period of time. So this is why the holistic nature of the model is what keeps us in balance, that we need to pay attention to all 9 habits. And evangelizing is an important habit, but it's only one of the 9 habits in the model.
Yes, I really like that holistic nature. And I do get that because, as we've been going through, we're now on the 7th habit, and we typically have a section moment when we look at how they're related, but they certainly are related and they do work with each other. And obviously that is part of the model as well. So yes, I actually absolutely see that and they get that. And actually one thing I heard the other week, because I happened to listen to some Tony Robbins, and I thought of this habit because it can be cultural, John, because being British, or I'll own it for myself, I can feel a little bit squirmy in evangelizing about what I'm doing and how good it might be and sharing the good news about my consultancy, my work. But Tony Robbins said something which has helped me is helping me to turn this around, because he actually said, you are here to serve, but you do a disservice if you don't talk about why you're here and what you have to offer. And I just thought that was so powerful, because sometimes I think evangelize can be almost not quite British, how wonderful and what's happening. We're actually kind of saying, I'm really passionate about making a difference in your life. If this resonates with you, come and explore this. But if I don't evangelize, then people won't know that this service, this company, this organization is here. As you said, it's everyone's job then, everyone. And I love that, because one of the most powerful things I've seen, or I note, having done my MBA at Warwick and loved services management, looked at the whole of the organization, is I like the fact that wherever you touch an organization, you get a sense of the heartbeat of that organization. That's an excellent organization for me. So if everyone is in touch with the why they're here, why they're doing this, and they're passionate about it in an authentic way, that for me has a multiplier effect across the organization. And I'm linking that back to the working with this trust, the executive trust model also has this same multiplicative effect, I think.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember, as I think we talked about in the previous podcast, about being humble, that these two habits are next to each other in the model. And it reminds us that we evangelize on behalf of the mission. We don't evangelize on behalf of the self. Mm-hmm. So I hope that when people are listening to me on these podcasts, I hope that they're hearing that I'm passionate about trust and that I want to talk about trust. I want to write about trust. I want to shout from the rooftops about trust. But I'm not leading with John Blakey. I'm leading with trust. Yes, I am the person who wrote the book, and so, there's a point at which the two come together. But I hope that people, are hearing, a passionate vision around the mission of trust rather than a passionate vision around the mission of John Blakey.
And there's one further point I want to bring out, because I thought it's very relevant to the leaders listening today. And that is, as you said, you can choose to evangelize. But one thing you say in the chapter on this is you speak about actually the importance of relating to stakeholder challenges first. Because I guess you're saying if you jump in and evangelize without first understanding where they're coming from, then perhaps this habit can fall over.
Yes. Yeah. I was working actually with a chief executive last week in a coaching session. And that organization, they just announced a takeover of that organization. And the chief executive could sense that the organization was coming to terms with the impact of that announcement, and that there was a lot of fear and trepidation, and people worried about losing things that they valued in the organization through this takeover. And we were talking about the importance of respecting that period, acknowledging that, accepting it, and not rushing too quickly to announce the new vision of the promised land before people have actually processed and come to terms with the nature of the change. So I think as evangelists, as people spreading the good news, we need to again understand the need to get alongside people, as they say in NLP terms, to pace then lead. That pacing people, getting alongside them, walking a mile in their shoes, empathizing with them, which again is part of these habits of trust, other habits of trust, that's often important to lead with that before coming in with the great, grand, new, exciting vision. And I do work with a lot of leaders who are trying to calibrate that more carefully these days in order to make sure they don't go too quick into this habit before they've really paced where people are at and built a little bit of that bedrock of trust before they come in with the latest exciting world-changing vision.
And something's just come to me, John, actually, that this habit, choosing to evangelize, we've spoken about, we're sharing the good news, but I've just had a thought that perhaps, almost every business goes through some difficult challenges, some difficult times, and let's choose one. There might be a situation where redundancies are happening. And we spoke earlier about choosing to evangelize is to rehumanize the workplace, to have concern for the well-being of others. So bizarrely, choosing to evangelize may well be really thinking deeply about how am I sharing this news? In which way am I doing this? Because I've heard instances of where it's been happened and people have said, the way actually I was made redundant really honored me. And they continue to evangelize the company outside their employment because they felt really honored, even though they understood why, and they felt the decision was fair and handled in the correct manner.
Yeah. And again, I think the other habits come in, don't they? Being kind, if there are negative things happening like redundancies, then the way you do them often shows that habit of being kind and respecting the dignity of the individual. And that will maximize the possibility that people will still want to spread the good news about your brand and your culture. So I think we're looking at, as I say, how these habits interact. And one of the things I've noticed in the lockdown, and in the pandemic, there have been times when leaders have have needed to empathize with the difficulties of the current situation. And then there have been other times when it's the time to paint a picture of what the brave new world is going to look like. And really sort of picking the right time and the right place to know when to do that empathizing versus when to do the evangelizing, I think is something for us to really reflect on and be careful with in our leadership, particularly in times of crisis, particularly when there is stress and hardship and difficulties that people are experiencing. We have to just be careful with this habit. But I still think it's important, and I still think people need to hear and feel that evangelizing. But we just have to measure it carefully against the other aspects of the 9 habits.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that's a really good point. So I'm guessing that those listening are probably getting some sort of sense of what choosing to evangelize may mean, but perhaps they're curious from a practical perspective of how executives actually use this leadership habit to make a real difference in their organization. So we come to the part of the podcast where I've recorded a short interview with Fiona Furman, the communications manager from NAHL Group, and they have embedded the trusted executive model in their organization. So we're going to hear from Fiona now and how they've used the habit choosing to evangelize. And as I always say, I know you haven't heard this, John, so I look forward to your response afterwards. So once again, I'm with Fiona Furman, the communications manager with NAHL Group, a group of consumer legal businesses, including National Accident Helpline. And as an organization, NAHL are using the Trusted Executive Framework to empower the way they work and serve their customers. Now, today we move into the third pillar of trustworthiness, that of benevolence, the extent to which we walk our talk. And we move on to the 7th leadership habit, choosing to evangelize. So Fiona, I'm really interested to hear, how have you used the 7th leadership habit, choosing to evangelize, within your organization to make a real difference?
Once we started working with the Trusted Executive, we identified that evangelizing was certainly an area where we could make some improvements. Evangelizing about our work and who we are and what we do, but also about our culture. We're very, very proud of our culture in all of the businesses at NAHL Group, and they've all got very positive, dedicated, driven cultures, but also friendly and caring. And so one of the ways that we started to do that was to look for some external validation, which is sometimes a little bit easier, isn't it, than kind of banging your own drum. It's kind of always a bit easier to see if somebody else can tell you that you've done a good job. And so we started engaging with things like the Investors in People program, where now 2 of our businesses are gold standard. We have one that's at silver standard, and we also have engaged with the Times, what was the Times 100, but the top 100 businesses. And another way is to kind of be a little bit more evangelistic internally as well. So and I think part of the way that we recruit against our values is that we tend to employ people with a natural level of humility, which can again make it quite difficult to be able to kind of evangelize about the work that we're doing. But going back a little ways to sort of 2015, the government announced some enormous regulatory changes to the personal injury business overall, and that was going to really impact our business. So for the last 6 years, we've been re-engineering that side of our business to be able to respond to that change, and the deadlines kept moving. So it's going to go live here, and then it didn't, and it's going to go live now, and then it didn't. And we're coming to the position now where we're just weeks away from that going live. And what we've identified, because we started working on it so early, I think there's quite a few other businesses who perhaps kind of thought, well, we'll leave it and see what happens. Whereas we've been very, very much on the front foot about it. And as I said, it's completely re-engineered our entire business to be able to deal with that change. And one of the things that we're doing now, it started off as an internal project, but I think we'll probably be taking it in external, is to kind of talk about how ready we are. You know, as a business, we've worked so incredibly hard. And so I'm putting together a video at the moment where some of the key people involved in that project are sending me little videos of them telling us that, just saying that they're ready, do whatever it is they would normally do. So I've got people hanging upside down in gyms going, I'm ready. You know, I've got people at the top of mountains on bikes saying, I'm ready. And we're going to be sending that out to our people so they can see that we've done this amazing work over this last 6 years, and that we're now coming to the culmination of that work, and that we are we are so ready that we're not kind of worried about it, because we've done all of this front work, and we'll obviously be then sharing that externally as well, so that other people can see that we're not a business that waits for things to happen to it and then kind of thinks, oh gosh, how are we going to handle this now? We saw the kernel of what was happening very, very early on, and have been on a 6-year journey to make sure that our business is sustainable.
And finally, we always like to just dig a little deeper. So as you've been working with Evangelize, what for you has been a personal insight or a personal growth moment through using the choosing to evangelize leadership habit?
So I think really what I've learned through looking at evangelizing through a trusted executive is that evangelizing isn't about being full of yourself. And that's where sometimes that tension between humility and evangelizing comes from. I know that when we talk about being humble, I know John loves that quote from C.S. Lewis about how humility isn't about thinking less of yourself, it's about thinking of yourself less. And in a way, I think that evangelizing isn't about puffing yourself up, but oftentimes it's about shining the light on other people and about what they've done. Certainly from a business perspective, you can evangelize about your business by evangelizing about the work of your people and about how your people have done an amazing job. And I think that's really been an important one for me. And also just this sense that if we really truly believe in how good our businesses are, and we absolutely should if we're committed to them and we're choosing to work for them, then we shouldn't really have any problem with evangelizing about that work. And I think sometimes we're very reticent, and I think really it's just about having that belief and just saying, no, I absolutely believe in what my business does and the way it chooses to do it and the way it manages itself and the way that it behaves and the work that it does. And so I'm absolutely going to talk about that. And I think that's where I've helped to, in my own head, that's really helped to balance the two out for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your sharing, Fiona. I look forward to hearing from you next time. And let's hear what John has to say about this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed, John. Let's hear. I'm looking forward to your comments on what Fiona shared there.
Yeah, as always, it's great to hear somebody talking about being on the front line, working with these habits. And what I picked up from Fiona's talk about evangelizing there is, that point about we tend to assume that evangelizing is me evangelizing about myself. But she talked about, the idea of awards, that you can get independent bodies evangelizing about you. Yes, you have to apply often for those that recognition, but isn't it great when other people shine the light on you? And she also talked about our ability as leaders, our opportunity to shine the light on other people in the business or other people in our teams who are doing great work. So that pouring that sort of attention and recognition onto others is also a great example of evangelizing. So I think it helps us understand that this habit comes in many different variations, and that we need to find the one that works for us. I was also very impressed with Fiona's talk about the I'm Ready campaign that they spent 6 years, and you see, again, if I think of the other habits, they know that they've delivered. I mean, habit number 1 is deliver. They know they've worked hard. They know that they're going to deliver. And so there is substance behind their spreading the good news. It's not spin, it's not hype. They know they've put the hard work in, that they deserve that position. And you see, one of the things we have to realize with the habit of evangelizing is if we don't evangelize with the substance of the rest of the habits, we leave the space open for others to evangelize who might not have that substance, might not have that hard work, where it might be more spin and froth. And so we don't really want to leave the space open for that risk. So it does bring the onus back to us that if we've worked hard, if there's that integrity behind what we do and that passion, then finding our voice, I think, is an important responsibility because we've earned that right.
Certainly have. And also interviewing Fiona and listening back to her again, one word that came to my mind that is often perhaps sidestepped because, you can't be that, is there's a lot of this evangelize from the perspective, there's a lot of pride in a really sort of positive sense, pride in actually we've committed, we've done this job. And what just came to me actually is I did some consultancy work with Britannia Building Society, and it may well be so at the time, their mission was proud to be mutual. They're a mutual building society. But that proud had a real sense of pride, a sense of we're on a mission, we're making a difference. And I think that really came through for Fiona. And we're proud of what we've done, how we've worked together, what we've achieved here. It's something to really honour ourselves, honour others, and really, as you said, evangelize that. And together, I think what's also coming through when you look at the habits for me is really, Fiona said this, how much she enjoys working at this organization, because this energy, this passion is allowed to flow through the business. And I have a sneaking feeling that actually the trusted executive model actually enables that, because it puts something in John which is really powerful, really kind of solid. And people go, yes, actually, as you said, we are delivering, we are making a difference. We do have a pride in what we're doing, and we want to share this with others because it's important.
Yeah, and one of the behaviors that we measure under this habit, there are 3 behaviors that we measure. One of them is, does the leader have a passionate and inspiring vision that they communicate regularly? Another behavior is, does the leader bounce back quickly from disappointments and setbacks? Because great evangelists are very resilient. But the third behavior we look at and ask the question around is it obvious that the leader loves what they do?
Mm.
Is it obvious to others that you love what you do? And I think when we listened to Fiona talking there, we started to pick up that she loves what she does. She loves what NAHL does. And that's infectious. It's very, very infectious when you're working with people who love what they do. And so it is, a very hard thing to imitate or fabricate, but it comes through very clearly if you're working alongside people who genuinely love what they do.
It is in my old style MBA language. It really gives this, it's what they call it, and it becomes kind of like a core competence, a competitive advantage, because it takes time to develop and work with, and it requires commitment to do this. The trusted executive isn't just one read through the book and I'm done. It's how am I then choosing to embody this? And I think you mentioned something which feels really important, and this is how am I embodying this model for our organization? Because I have a sense that each organization can take their own flavor, as you said, of the different habits and still be authentic and honest and open and and really fully present with them, but actually make a use of it in their own way, because I think that's so powerful.
Yeah. I think everyone needs to think about where they are in the business cycle, and depending upon the sector they're in, what the products and services are that they're working with, they will find different nuances in terms of applying these habits. And of course, one of the things we talked about today is about the cultural norms that you find around these habits. One of the things I've found, over the last 5 years, delivering workshops on the 9 habits in different parts of the world, is that as you go west, the habit of evangelizing seems to get stronger. As you go west of the UK, it seems to become stronger and become more natural. As you go east, it actually gets weaker, but the habit of being humble gets stronger.
Yeah.
And so what you find is that there are cultural norms around these habits, that in some cultures, certain habits have been more aggressively developed, if you like, and in others, they're a little bit underdeveloped. I think all the habits are still relevant, but you have to just understand some of the nuances that might be at play in your market, in your country, in the particular cultural environment that you're working in.
So just one quick one on this before we move on. Actually, so you spoke about different cultures across the world, which I think is an excellent point. And I once heard, I'm talking about my MBA a lot today, I think it's on my MBA where actually it was said in a large organization, you can quite often get very different cultures across the different divisions. So in your experience, how does an organization deal with, for example, using these habits? Let's choose an evangelizing team, the sales team, versus, let's say, the accountancy team. I can choose that because that's my area of expertise. So how does it land with different departments in the way that it holds together as an organization, if that makes sense?
Yeah, again, the culture of an accountancy department typically is going to be less evangelical than the culture of a sales department. You're more naturally going to attract the evangelists into the sales function because it's what they love doing and they're good at it. And then you're going to attract, for example, the habit of consistency is going to be a stronger habit in the accountancy function. So you are going to attract different personality profiles into these different functions, and they are going to be naturally better at some habits than others. One of the things we talk about, at the top team level, is making sure that you've got the balance and you've got all the bases covered, and that that you have a champion around the table for each habit, because it is the balance and the holistic integration of these habits across a culture that is going to make it successful in a sustainable way over a period of time. And we've all probably seen and worked in organizations where maybe the consistency of the accounting function took over the whole organization, or the evangelism of the sales function took over the whole organization, and we know that leads to negative consequences. So it's all the time, I think, we're reinforcing balance and the holistic appreciation of the total model as being one of the keys. That we want to hear conversations going on in businesses about looking at the picture of all the habits and trying to weigh up different habits for different situations, rather than the whole culture being hijacked by one or two habits at the exclusion of the other habits in the model.
Great. And I got a real sense there of, if I'm talking about a leadership team, of really honoring the habits and honoring the expression of those habits in different individuals, which leads us beautifully in the next part, because we've got a part here which says that we've touched on it maybe, but how does the habit of choosing to evangelize, how does this habit work alongside the other habits in the model?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it sits next door to choosing to be humble, and I think that's a very important dynamic for people to think about how they do both. I think the coaching habit number 2, when we were listening to Fiona talking about evangelizing on the work of other people, that's also part of a coaching skill, is to encourage others and to focus on the things that are going well and the things that people are getting right is a great coaching skill. And I think the final habit I would mention would be habit number 8, the one that we'll talk about in the next podcast, the habit of bravery. That great evangelists, have a vision. Because it's a vision, it's not yet real today. And it's brave to put out a vision that nobody knows is going to be a fact. Nobody can say it's definitely going to happen, but somebody decides that the prospect of that vision is sufficiently exciting that they're willing to commit to it and to lead other people towards it. And I think that takes bravery and courage to aspire to that and to dare to dream that there are better places to get to than the one that we're actually at today.
And really so apt to these times, John. So for people listening and watching, how can they get further resources and hands-on experience of this habit, choosing to evangelize? Where would you point them to?
Yeah, I mentioned Simon Sinek, Start With Why. I think very, very popular book. There's a TED Talk, which I think has been watched by 34 million people around the globe. So, there must be something good about that. And it's a great model, the golden circle that Simon Sinek talks about. And I think it's a great example of the power of evangelism. I've also mentioned Guy Kawasaki. I think he actually calls himself, I think his job title was Chief Evangelist in the organization that he worked in. And he's written an article. If people want to grab an article for a quicker read, then his article in Harvard Business Review, The Art of Evangelism, is also a great read. So Guy Kawasaki, Simon Sinek are two people I would name check around this habit. And I think also you can learn a lot about this habit, I think, from reading about people who have done it well. For example, I've just finished reading the book Promise Me Dad by Joe Biden. And in reading that book, it really comes through. I think Joe Biden models a lot of the habits. And it's interesting that, in that book, he models a lot of the habits of evangelism in that book. And I think just reading the stories of people who have done this well, it does inspire you around the habit. So I would encourage people to look for role models of people who are doing this well, whether those are famous people that they can read about, or it might just be somebody in your own organization that seems to have a knack of being positive, of inspiring other people, and just starting to watch, what do they do? What do they say? What do they not say? And I think this is a habit you can pick up from others a great deal in terms of watching how they do this well.
Now we'll move on to the bit actually about when perhaps it doesn't go so well. We've spoken about the habit choosing to evangelize, and we've really heard how it's been grounded in your research. And we've heard how executives like Fiona have used it and the impact it's had on her organization. Now, something I really love about your book is you have a chapter called Cracks in the Pillar, what to do when something goes wrong, which is gritty, grounded realism for me. So looking at the habit choosing to evangelize, what can an organization do when this habit goes wrong?
Yeah, I think this habit is different to the others in as much that we talk about cracks in the pillar. And, if you're dishonest, I think that the crack in the pillar can be very deep and very obvious very quickly. Whereas evangelism, to me, when it goes wrong, it's more like a hairline crack. It's more like death by 1,000 cuts. I think people lose their mojo and lose that enthusiasm, inspiration, not overnight, but it sort of decays over a period of time. And I think that makes it quite hard to understand when you've lost it. When is that day when you suddenly lost that sparkle in your eye, you lost that enthusiasm and that loving what you do. It can sneak away quite quietly over a period of time. And so I think one of the things to protect people from that is feedback, getting feedback from the people around you, your customers, your team, your investors, getting feedback in terms of their perception of how you are coming over. Are you coming over with that spring in your step, with that sparkle in your eye, or has it gradually left the building? And I think so getting feedback is important with this habit, because you can lose it without knowing that you've lost it. And of course, if you realize that it has happened, and that for whatever reason, and I've seen this a lot in the pandemic, in lockdown, I've worked with leaders who just have woken up one morning and realized that they didn't have that mojo. They'd lost their mojo somewhere in the middle of all this crisis. It had just left them. And where do you go from there to rebuild it? One of the practical tips I would give people around that is tracking your motivation on a more careful basis. So, for example, I have some coaching clients who keep a daily log of their motivational score, and they will start to realize that certain things lift them up and certain things drag them down. And once they become more aware of that on a daily, weekly basis, they can start to design their diaries more consciously to build in these bits of inspiration and bits of motivation. And it can be silly little things, David. Like, I have a client that realized that music was a huge part of their inspiration and motivation. And the days that they listen to music are the days that they find that they're more likely to be evangelizing. And so once you become aware of that, is it music? Is it going for a run first thing in the morning? Is it listening to that podcast that, always seems to get to you and motivate you? I think it's our responsibility as leaders to consciously design our diaries such that we are getting that fuel and that nourishment that means that we are motivating ourselves and therefore able to motivate others through this habit of evangelism.
That's and it's can perhaps be quite a tender one, John, because I'm sensing that sometimes the organization itself may still have this driving or really passionate purpose, but perhaps the leader or one of the executive teams has perhaps been through their own cycle and is no longer so connected to that purpose. And it may well bring up a sense of, if I'm not able to choosing to evangelize with a passion and ease over a period of time, it may be a trigger for them to think, do I need to move on? Not because the organization is bad or they're bad, but because of something that's happened that actually, to use that wonderful phrase, mojo, they need to get the mojo back. And I think finally on this one, when things go wrong, what advice would you give to an executive who perhaps through, and I'll choose an example, I know I've done it myself, so I own it for myself, where perhaps you're doing a project, you're really passionate about it, and you're asking people to do things, it's going to be fantastic. And perhaps in the cold light of day, you reflect and think, gosh, I was passionate, but actually I was really a bit manipulative there, and I perhaps forced someone to do something they didn't want to do. You mentioned manipulation as being the opposite of evangelize. So how does someone recover when they think, oh, I think I might have been a bit manipulative there? Wasn't intending to be, but that's the way I think it's come across.
Well, if you realize that you've been manipulative and you're ready to sort of say, you know, actually maybe that wasn't a great thing, I think that in itself is a huge step, because I think there's a lot of manipulation that happens where people are completely blind to the fact that it's happened. So if you're at that point where you think, actually, yes, that was me, I did step over the line there into manipulation, I think the first thing to say is great that you're able to own that and take responsibility for it. And then, as we always say with this model, look at the other habits and see how the other habits can help you. Being kind, you know, could be a habit that would be really helpful in a situation where you thought you'd manipulated someone. Being honest and open to have that conversation. You know, are you brave enough to be able to actually say to the people affected that you realize in hindsight it might not have been the best way to handle something? So I think these other habits can always come to your rescue. But the most important thing is the first step of saying, actually, have I got the awareness, and am I getting the feedback that allows me to understand when I have slipped up?
Thank you. I'm sure a few bells are ringing with the people there, whether it's 360 feedback, whether they're doing self-awareness through emotional intelligence or whatever. Those all perhaps can give clues to and draw on the other habits within the model to help them actually show up in the best possible way in the workplace. Now, John, we get to the part that I really love, because this is what gives you the opportunity to go deeper, because we're going to ask why this habit matters to you. And I know I always say, actually, you've spent a long time researching and developing this model. And I know how passionate you are personally about trust and this particular habit, choosing to evangelize. So let's dive a little bit deeper here. Why does this habit matter personally to you? And as we said before, there are two levels for you. So yes, I am going to invite you to be vulnerable and explore both. So firstly, why is this habit really personally important to you?
Yeah, as a business leader in my business career, you know, I'm reminded of that formula for performance that says performance equals motivation times ability times opportunity. You know, performance equals motivation times ability times opportunity. And I think in my career, I underestimated the importance of motivation. And it was only actually when I worked with elite sports people that I started to understand how they consciously focused on their motivation and took responsibility for it, and also focused on helping others with that motivation. So I saw levels of, you know, when I worked with Olympic athletes and, you know, I worked with the England cricket coach for a period of time, the world of sport showed me a completely different level of motivation and the importance of motivation. And I think that influenced me a lot in terms of recognizing that you can't take your motivation for granted. I remember going on a course a few years ago, and at the beginning of the week they said, you know, how motivated do you think you are on a scale 0 to 10? And I said, well, 8. You know, by the end of the week I realized that I got the scale completely wrong and that I should have said 4, because the extra motivation that course drew out of me absolutely astounded me. And it just made me realize that most of us are operating at levels of motivation that in the world of elite sport you just wouldn't tolerate. So that's one aspect of why it's important to me, David. And I suppose the other aspect that we talk about on this podcast is that you know, as someone with a Christian faith, then, you know, obviously evangelism, that is where the religious sort of word hits home, and we do find some of the great evangelists in the world's great religions. And if I think of the Christian religion, then it's the Apostle Paul. To me, is the absolute epitome of the greatest evangelist, you know, I have ever sort of read about or known about. The fact that Paul the apostle, who originally was the scourge of the Christian faith, and then through his conversion became the greatest apostle, an evangelist for Christianity. And his ability to withstand setbacks and disappointments and hardship. I mean, most of the New Testament that he wrote from a prison cell, and not even a prison cell and the persecution by the Roman authorities could keep him down. Not even a prison cell could silence him. And he knew that he was probably going to be sent to his death for what he believed in. But because of his absolute inspiration and faith and excitement about, his vision, it didn't stop him. And I love that bit, in 2 Timothy, book that Paul wrote, chapter 4, verse 7, where he says at the end, he's anticipating the end, and he says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And you can just imagine the whole crowd cheering at that point. It's like we all want to cheer at that point, because he did finish the race. He did fight the good faith, and he did keep the faith. What a wonderful, wonderful evangelist. And I'm sure there are other equally inspiring examples in the great faiths of the world.
I love that. And I'm also thinking, actually, this aspect of choosing to evangelize. I love how you spoke about the motivation in the sports. And quite often, as you said, it can be actually holding on to that vision, sometimes in very desperate and difficult times, because I quite often think, we know Paul didn't always have it easy, but, looking at Jesus, I just get the sense, and it is there in the Gospels, that at times it was really hard. But the way he kept on, actually, I think, saying to disciples, well, the kingdom of God is here and now. He gave them a real powerful vision, and linked that into, asking them, how are you loving yourself? How are you loving your neighbor? And these practical things, I think, quite often said, when they're out walking, and again, no doubt they would have been worried, anxious, concerned, tired. And he gives the example, doesn't he, of consider the lilies. How are they looked after? And don't you think you will be looked after too? So I think the sense of, quite often we think in, Christian faith evangelism is, I tell you have to accept this, that, and the other, and this dogma. But from a practical embodied sense, I just get a sense of Jesus really being with the disciples, as you said, really like that sports example, firing them up in a way that they're like, yes, absolutely, this is why I'm here.
Yeah. And I mean, can you imagine how great an evangelist you must be if you just walked up to somebody on the beach, a fisherman, and just looked them in the eye and said, follow me. And then they followed you.
Yeah.
I mean, what is going on there? I mean, what on earth is happening in that moment? But that was the power of, I remember people talked about Steve Jobs. They used to say that he was such a great evangelist, Steve Jobs, that he had around him a reality distortion field. And if you got too close to him, you started to think the way that he thought, and you started to see the way that he thought. And I'm thinking, Steve Jobs had that reality distortion field. Well, someone like Jesus had that times, 1,000. He had a reality distortion field around him, which meant that if you came into the orbit of that vision and that presence, then you couldn't help but be excited and consumed and inspired by a vision. And Steve Jobs, undoubtedly a fantastic evangelist in business. And we can see that, we only have to sort of see those examples, those worldly examples, to know the power that it can have on a business over a period of time, or a group of people over a period of time.
Yes, absolutely. And also something I hadn't thought of before in connection with this, but in choosing to evangelize, but you brought it to me, I think, today, because you were talking about particularly this pillar of benevolence, concern for well-being of others. Then one aspect of that, and as we spoke, didn't we, about actually how you get in touch with, relate to the stakeholder first. If I move away from language stakeholder, the idea that's just come to me is, and I was speaking before we came on the podcast, I've been to the Holy Land, Jerusalem, I've been to the place where they believe, the Sermon on the Mount was. But this sense of actually Jesus addressing these big crowds, one of the things, feeding of the 5,000, if you think of that, part of that was actually then taking care of those people. What, are they hungry? What have they had to eat? almost not just rehumanize the workplace, but rehumanize this sense of this gathering. Because I wonder at that time how many perhaps speakers may have got up and spoken for an hour, 2 hours, and then disappeared. But here was Jesus asking them, what are they hungry? What do they need?
Mm. Yeah, and I think you're right to link that to that wider benevolence aspect, that this is one habit as part of that wider benevolence. And we'll talk about those are the two habits, being brave and being kind. And that's where that compassion piece comes in, that was Jesus a great speaker? Yes, he was. But was he also incredibly compassionate to the people that were listening to him? Yes, he ticked that box as well. And, that's where, the mastery of all the habits in parallel is when you start to see, unique impact of those people.
Yes, and it does share the news, actually, going back to a previous podcast when Fiona was talking about how when NHHL went into the COVID pandemic, how the employees went on furlough, a number did, but they chose to actually then ensure they were connected with and they were made to feel they were still part of the organization, which for me is part of this kind of evangelist benevolence of actually having a concern for their well-being. And I can just see those that were treated in that way, just actually then sharing with others what a great place this is to work, because actually, although I'm not at work at the moment and I'm on furlough, I'm still getting communication. I'm still being involved. I'm still excited coming back. I'm motivated to get back. So this, my goodness, this is very powerful, isn't it? This particular habit, which I hadn't really realized.
Spreading the word. We can use that phrase in a religious context of spreading the word, but we can use it in a business context, that if you've got people spreading the word for you, then you will build a following, and it will be done through many hands making light work of that challenge, rather than one great pair of hands trying to do the whole thing on their own. Very, very infectious, very contagious, if you can do this with the integrity and the consistency that it requires.
And very, as you said, I'm coming back to that word, very inspiring, that actually, I think you said earlier, you're touching the hearts of those that are with you perhaps on this journey in the organization for this purpose, for this mission, for what we're doing. And it really does, I think it does has, for organizations I've worked for where I've been motivated and enjoying, there's a certain buzz about the place. There's a certain buzz between the people. There's a certain sense of, coming back to that word of pride, of excitement, of actually, I love coming to work. So it really is important. Right. And talking of motivating or buzz, we traditionally have, you've published a book, Coaching Poetry from a Spiritual Path, where you say, whatever your own religious beliefs, these poems will challenge you to think deeply and inspire you to take the next step on your own spiritual path, your leadership path. So this is a point where I invite you to share one poem from your book, which ties into this perspective of choosing to evangelize.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the challenge, David. I've been looking through the book, and there's a couple of poems that I narrowed it down to, but the one I've chosen to go for is this poem called Beyond the Bridge. Beyond the Bridge. And I think the title itself is giving you a clue that it's about looking into the future and bridging the present with the future. So this is a poem that's really anticipating where are we going as a human race. So it's it's sort of quite vast in its scope, but I will share it with you in terms of that spirit of evangelism. Beyond the bridge lies the ocean, majestic in its scope and depth. Beyond the bridge lies the final step, the creational freedom of our dreams. And though I dance with you with the waves, though I feel the salty spray on my burning lips, I am also that which holds us, defines us in its all-encompassing embrace. Though I feel the movement of my earthly limbs, I am also humming with the joy of the absolute. I am that I am, the Alpha, the Omega, and all that's in between. So with this choice, we become the causal field, the creator and the created, the architects of our world. With this choice, we bless ourselves and let go the final threads, And as we leap high above the waves with the glee of our evolution, we mirror the steps of our predecessors, evolutionary strategists all, the insect, the fish, the amphibian, the reptile, the mammal, the human being. Beyond the bridge lies the truth. A new being waits to greet us. It is you and I and them. Beyond the bridge lies the truth, the great homecoming of man.
Wow. just so apt for our times, John. So beautiful, this sense of, as you said, beyond the bridge, and the creator, such a beautiful active word, I think, that actually not just people not just choosing the habits, but actually choosing to create perhaps this world that we're really perhaps yearning to see beyond the pandemic. And one word you had in there, which has really touched me on my own journey, particularly around Celtic Christianity. And that's, I think you chose the word bless, or I might say blessing. And one thing I love about the blessing is they quite often say, if you're busy blessing or you're blessing someone else, you can't be blessing and cursing someone at the same time. So I think this word blessing has this wonderful energy for me. If you're blessing someone or choosing to do that, that actually ties in beautifully to choosing to evangelize. I think if you're choosing to evangelize, you're looking to be a blessing, and that really touches me. So thank you for sharing that. I shall listen to that again. I really enjoyed that.
Great.
Now, after the inspiration of the poem, John, there's part here actually that the people are probably wondering, gosh, I really enjoyed this podcast. Where can I go? What should I do to explore these 9 habits? Can I book a keynote or workshop program or sign up for a newsletter? What can you offer people?
Yeah, the team here at the Trusted Executive Foundation, we're a not-for-profit. As you said earlier, our mission is to create a new standard of leadership defined by trustworthiness. And we have a Journey of Trust program that allows different leaders and organizations to engage with this work at whatever level they feel comfortable. That might be, as you say, a one-off keynote session, or it might extend to a program of leadership development over several months. We're just keen to sort of make the model available to share and build a community of leaders that all share, again, this vision that we feel now is the time for leaders to rely on the power of trust. That is our good news, and we're inviting people to engage with that and to be part of this community that wants to work this model and embed it in organizations in the same way that Fiona and the team at NEHL have done over recent years. So I think, if any of that is exciting and attractive for our listeners, then best port of call is to go to the website, www.trustexecutive.com, to read about the journey of trust, read the case studies about how we've worked with different clients, and just weigh up whether that's a community of people that you want to be part of, and you want to be part of creating this future where we have a more trustworthy standard of leadership in and across our institutions.
Wonderful. I know you call it an invitational model, so you're inviting people in. And I think you said before you're happy for people to reach out and connect with you on LinkedIn, which I'll put a link in below. And I would encourage people to have a look at, and there's now a second edition book out on the Trusted Executive by John Blakey. Find that from your own chosen bookshop, but more importantly, just actually do some follow-up, because there's some fantastic resources. And as you said, John, if it resonates with you, please do decide to take it a step further, because I think for me, this is one of the Trusted Executive model is one of these models that can really make a difference in your organization. So if you're finding that you're connecting with the material, then please do reach out to John and the team. So, goodness, John, so thank you once again for the way that you're stepping out in the business world with a real heart and a real passion for supporting businesses and organizations to be the very best they can be. So I invite you to say a few closing words to those who are listening.
Yeah, as always, thank you for listening and sticking with it. If you've listened to all 7 and you're up to the 7th habit, then that's fantastic. We've got 2 more habits to go. Be brave and be kind. And I think my advice in terms of this habit, the Evangelize habit, is really to think about, the phrase I use is courageous goals. What are your courageous goals, and what is the breadth of your courageous goals? Does it cover both your business, your personal life, and your wider contribution back into society? Because that's the breadth and depth of goals that really makes for great evangelists. And it's always inspiring to work with leaders who've got clarity around those different aspects of their why, across all of those 3 areas. So I encourage you, if you haven't got that, then that would be something I would really encourage as a next step in building this habit of evangelism.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. I'm already looking forward to the next habit number 8, which is choosing to be brave. So until next time, may you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks, David.